Welcome to the Multiply Your Success podcast, where each week we help growth-minded entrepreneurs and franchise leaders take the next step in their expansion journey. I'm your host, Tom Dufour, CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. And as we open today, I'm wondering if you've struggled or maybe are currently struggling with managing hourly staff. In today's world, sometimes that seems like it might be a bit of a rhetorical question, because I can say that it's the number one pain point I hear from our clients. The constant struggle with managing and keeping quality staff, especially part-time and hourly employees, is a real thing that so many business leaders I know struggle with. Well, to help us with this problem, we've brought back Scott Greenberg, who just released his newest book, Stop the Shift Show: Turn Your Struggling Hourly Workers into a Top-Performing Team. In our episode, Scott shares so many great ideas and nuggets about his newest book. And if you want to hear Scott's previous interview, check out episode 172. Now, a little background on Scott. He's a speaker, writer, and coach who helps franchisees grow their business. He's given presentations in all 50 U.S. states and throughout the world with clients including McDonald's, the U.S. Air Force, TEDx, Allstate, Great Clips, Remax, Salesforce, Nike, and countless others. Scott is the author of his first book, The Wealthy Franchisee: Game-Changing Steps to Become a Thriving Franchise Superstar, which we spoke about on episode 172, if you want to check that out. And now his newest book, which we talked about, Stop the Shift Show. You're going to love this interview, and you're going to love his book as well. I really encourage you to check it out. It is really insightful, and I enjoyed it a lot. So let's go ahead and jump right into my interview with Scott Greenberg.
My name is Scott Greenberg. I'm a speaker and writer and president. I do business under Green Inc., but a lot of people know me from my first book title, which is The Wealthy Franchisee.
Well, thank you so much for being here again. And the last time you were on the show, we had you talking about The Wealthy Franchisee and your book there. And now, as luck would have it, today is launch day for your new book, Stop the Shift Show. And so, as a way of just getting things started, give us an overview about the book and then what led you to want to start writing this in the first place.
Yeah, it's a big day for me. It's exciting. So the book is called Stop the Shift Show: Turn Your Struggling Hourly Workers into a Top-Performing Team. So it's all about what franchise owners, managers, anybody who works with hourly employees, what they can do to bring out the best in this population. My first book, The Wealthy Franchisee, is all about what franchise business owners can do to make sure they're an asset to their own business and really set it up for great success. Some of that book, I talk about managing employees. Well, that is the content that seemed to generate the most follow-up questions. That I identified was a real pain point for people. And reflecting on my own experience as a business owner, if you would have asked me during the first couple of years what about that was most challenging, I wouldn't have hesitated to say employees. So that continues to be the case with so many managers, so many business leaders, so many franchisees. And so I decided maybe that's a pain that I could help relieve for some people. So I took a deep dive, not only reflecting my own experience, but I went in search of business leaders, not just franchisees, but factories and small businesses and large businesses in a variety of industries, finding people who have cracked the code for getting the best out of hourly workers, to figure out what they're doing that makes them different from everyone else. So that's what the new book is about.
And one of the things in the book, and I appreciate having an opportunity to get an early copy of it so that I could read through it and plug for the book. It's awesome. I love it. And we'll make sure that we include that in the show notes as well, links back to it. One of the things you highlight, though, is this difference between hourly workers and salary workers. So will you talk through that a little bit here?
I've read over the years, just in the work that I do, like all the big leadership and management books that are out there. And when I was managing my own employees and was struggling with them, I kind of went back to those books and realized that what they all seem to have in common is broad perspective about leadership. That the way you lead engineers is the same way you should be leading cashiers. And it's simply not true. You wouldn't market to all populations the same way to sell your product and services. You wouldn't try to sell the same products and services to all people. You adapt based on the people who are in front of you. Hourly workers are completely different in so many ways. There are some universal principles, but there are some real meaningful differences. And so I'm really interested in what those differences are. So I'll give you an example. that when you have, first of all, everybody wants respect. Everybody wants fair compensation. Everybody wants to feel like they're doing meaningful work. These are universal human principles. But those on salary earn more respect, get more compensation. Their hours and income are reliable, so they can plan a life, figure out where they're going to live. They can access credit more easily because they can establish that reliable, consistent income. Well, those who are hourly, typically they're bringing less skills, less education. Well, every week, every 2 weeks, their hours are changing. If times are tough, their hours might be reduced. But even when times are great, their hours might be changed. So it's harder for them to plan a life, to figure out childcare. A good percentage of hourly workers are going to another job, or maybe they're going to class, or maybe they're revolving a life around other people in the household. Well, as their hours are constantly changed, and therefore their income is constantly changed, they're constantly juggling. Hourly work tends to have less long-term prospects. There's fewer growth opportunities. And so they're feeling less, and the relationships with management tend to be more transactional than relational. And so they're feeling less loyalty from their employer. They're going to be less loyal to the employer. It's not because they're bad people. It's because their circumstances are so different. Their work tends to be less creative, more repetitive, often more physical. There's just so many things that are different. We can't expect to, present our mission statement and our values to hourly workers and expect the same kind of response that we might get from those on salary.
One of the things that stuck out to me as well is that in many cases, sometimes the employees are there more on a transactional basis as well, where they're trying to earn an income to provide, as you had mentioned, they have a second job or what they're doing at your place of employment as a part-time employee. It might just be filling a temporary need for them. So I found that very interesting.
Some of them are saving up money for prom or trying to come up with something to do during the summertime. We've been that employee. We're not on a career path. We never said we were on a career path. You can't expect the same. And I want them to treat it like they're owners.
Yeah.
Okay, then give them shares of stock in the company. Give them equity in the company. If not, why should they? It's an absurd desire.
To think about this challenge that is echoed, that sentiment is echoed that you shared in the book, in your own experience. And when I was a multi-unit franchisee, had the same challenge and experience of managing hourly staff. And one of the points you bring up in the book, I'd love for you to share a little bit about, is this concept of how much of it is the employee versus how much of it is the manager or the owner? And how does this self-awareness fit into this equation?
I believe if it's one or two employees, then it could be the employees that, it's easy to mishire someone. They're the wrong fit for the position or for the culture, that kind of thing. But I think if it's more than that, and I think if it's consistent, I think it's long-term, it is also a reflection of management. And that shouldn't come as a surprise because most people become managers because they were decent employees. Maybe they're reliable, so they get promoted, but they very rarely get trained in management itself. Or maybe they get trained in the procedural part of management, how to put together a schedule, how to run payroll, but they're not necessarily trained how to have influence, on how to engage and how to inspire and how to problem solve. So, you and I both do a lot of work in the franchise world. So you have people who maybe have no management experience at all, but they're able to write a check and buy a franchise. Suddenly they're a boss. Or they come from the corporate world where they were leading and managing in a white collar setting, but they're new to this kind of management. So it's not a surprise. And so most people, they manage the way they were managed. And by the way, in franchising, as you know, franchisors, they'll teach you the system and they'll say everything you need to know, but typically they won't teach you anything about management. For one, they may not know. For number two, they don't want to have anything to do with anything human resources related because they're terrified of being called joint employers. So franchisees can get into the business, get no support or little support, no training in how to manage. They don't know how to train other managers. And so I think that very often employee performance is also a reflection of the management they're getting, not just of their own abilities or lack thereof, or their own commitment or lack thereof.
Talk through how employers are able to try and get some better performance from their hourly workers. What can they do for that?
Well, that's certainly what the entire book is about. I'll share you a few big concepts that are there. So number one, I would say that to make formal leadership and management training part of your process, starting with yourself, if you are the owner, if you are the manager. But I think it's important that anybody who's put in a leadership role should be taught how to manage people. right? So figure out how to do that. That is as important as how to manage a system, right? Because ultimately these are people-run businesses. And so provide better formal management training. The second thing is be good at delivering and providing your employees soft needs. Meet their soft needs. We talk a lot about hard skills and soft skills, right? Well, there's also hard needs and soft needs. Hard needs are things like money. It's the stuff that employees want in exchange for their work. It could also be other benefits and perks. But employees also have soft needs, emotional desires that they may or not realize or articulate, but they're absolutely there. Things like respect, safety, and with younger generations, emotional safety, we all know is big for them. Flexibility, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. These things really matter. And so all things being equal, yeah, employees will go where they can get paid the most money. Surveys were done at the latter end of the pandemic when people were desperate for employees about what employees want most and, their biggest concern, the why they're leaving. And the answer was always, well, for money. Well, the reason, because that was the only variable, right? But the truth is, just as consumers will pay more for a better customer experience, employees will accept less for a better work experience. Not that we should pay them less, we should pay them well, but we don't have to pay them the best in order to be the employer of choice. If we create a work environment that meets their specific soft needs, that is emotionally wonderful, they're more likely to stay, have loyalty, and they're more likely to really buy into what's there. So one is provide better management training, so there's better management. Number two, identify their soft needs, their emotional needs. And by the way, there's so much more to that than just being nice to people or buying them pizza every Thursday. That's kindness. That's not addressing the very things that create loyalty. The military has not created loyalty by buying people pizza, right? There's so much more to it. So better management training, meet their soft needs. The third thing I would say is take culture off the mountaintop and bring it to the floor. We talk about culture in a corporation. It could be big, it could be grand, it could be abstract, right? There's all this pageantry around it. And in white collar settings, that works, that's fine. But in hourly worker settings, not so much. Do your employees even know what integrity means? If you say, well, through our business, our mission is to change the world, but they're making coffee, right? Like there's going to be a disconnect there. So let's not make it so grand. So yeah, you know what? Our mission is to bring one cup of joy to customers each day, to make their day a little bit better, which does make the world better, but it's a way that we can understand. Instead of saying integrity, how about giving them a list of do's and don'ts? We always follow through in our commitments. We speak kindly of each other. We always follow through on what we say we're going to do. Give them a set of behaviors that they understand, that when we engage in those behaviors, it represents, it lives integrity, but it actually is a way that they can understand. So that is, I think, is much more important. So those are just a few ideas. But again, the whole book is about how to boost their performance. But hopefully it will give you a little taste.
The book from cover to cover is full of great suggestions, ideas, thoughts, and lessons to potentially apply to your own business or to help grow a company. One comment that I highlighted in the book that I made note of is there's a quote. You said, "Yesterday is gone and it ain't coming back." And I thought that was an excellent quote. And it was a point where you were talking about, I know I've heard this, and you expressed it as well, about every generation complaining about the kids these days. This younger generation, some people say they're entitled, they're sensitive, they're less reliable, they're this, that, and the other, right? However they're being described at that moment in time. How do you respond to someone who's maybe thought that or thinking that in employing this next crop of young professionals that's coming to the market?
People have always criticized the generations that come after them. Those criticisms we heard over the last few generations are screen addicted and entitled and soft, that sort of thing. Certainly, we've said that for millennials for about the last quarter of a century, since millennials have been in the workplace. So how have millennials turned out? They're now running companies, performing surgery, governing countries. They're married, they have kids, they buy homes. Not only are they functional, our society couldn't function without them. In spite of the soccer trophies, in spite of the social media and the screen addiction. Why? First of all, I agree with the initial criticism when millennials were young. We said, there's no way they can survive in our world. But they haven't had to survive in our world. We older people have to survive in theirs. The world has revolved around them. They've done just fine. And there's no reason to believe that with Generation Z, it'll be any different. I'm a Generation X. Is Generation Z really a worse generation? Yes, they are. I get to say that because I have two kids who are part of that generation. But that's my bias. That's my perspective when I put on my Generation X colored glasses. That's the way through I see them. But that perspective, that judgment isn't going to help me raise my kids or manage my employees. So what I need to do is stop judging. Whether they're better or worse is irrelevant. What matters is who are they? What do they care about? And how can I get through to them to boost their performance? That's all that matters. And so we need to stop judging the generations and instead be curious about them without the judgment so that we can manage them and bring out their best. And there's every reason to believe that the upcoming generations will do just as well, if not better than previous.
One of the things in the book, and I think it was figure 8-2 that you highlighted this, where you talked and showed a visual and then talked through the 30-second leadership model. I'd love for you to talk through that a little bit and explain what that is.
Coaching employees is a critical skill for a manager to be able to see an employee's performance and elevate it. And then once it's great, preserve it. But employees' performance varies, not just from employee to employee, but within one employee for all the various tasks. There's some things that they're great at, some things where they struggle. But we tend to look at employees as these people are my superstars and these people are my strugglers. And what happens is the superstars don't get coached for where they actually need help. And those who are struggling, they don't get praise and reinforcement for the areas where they're doing well. So we created an employee coaching model called 30-second leadership. And the model basically is about how to identify, to diagnose where an employee is at for a given task. And based on your diagnosis, determine what is the best way to coach them to boost their skill set, which is their hard skills, their mindset, which is the soft skills, to determine which area is problematic. Is it one, the other, or both? And then what is the best way to coach them to boost their performance? That's probably the easiest way to describe it. But what's nice about it is it's not philosophical. It is a practical hard skills tool that people can use immediately to become better managers, to boost employee performance and preserve it.
And one thing that I really liked that you shared too is it provides that immediate feedback to that employee, oftentimes either in the moment or shortly thereafter, so that they're able to understand how they're performing. So are they doing well? Is it an area where they can be coached and given some guidance on how to improve the task that they're doing? Versus a great comparison that I've seen, and I can say, I know I'm guilty of doing, where I hire a new employee, do some super basic training and say, here you go, into the arms of customers, right? And serving customers. That generally has not gone well. So I found it really interesting with this accountability and coaching component that you mix in with that.
Well, and I just think it's so important that when we see underperformance, that we need to know the reason for it. Is the issue what the employee knows, or is the issue how they feel? Is it about their aptitude, in which case they need help, more training, or is it about their attitude, in which case they need encouragement or perhaps discipline? These are two very different things, and it's easy to mix them up, get them wrong, in which case you're not giving enough coaching, or maybe you're micromanaging them, but you're not meeting their needs if you're not first diagnosing them. And so that's what the model is all about.
Well, Scott, this is a great time in the show where we'll make a transition and we ask every guest the same 4 questions before they go. And since you've been on the show before, we decided pre-show, your answers will try to tie back toward hourly employees, managing, maybe being an hourly employee at some point in your career or in relation to your book. So the first question is, have you had a miss or two on your journey and something you learned from it?
No misses. I've been perfect from the very beginning. Hang on a second. Let me wake up here. Yeah, a lot of misses, especially, when I first opened my edible arrangements business, I had already been a motivational speaker for 14 years. The big miss was I overestimated my ability to actually manage employees in the real world. So I came at my first staff from the mountaintop. I brought out a big piece of butcher paper and colored markers. I said, let's brainstorm our values. They had no idea what I was talking about. Like I really spoke in that leadership speak. They hadn't read all the management books like I had. So they didn't know how they're supposed to be responding to all my, leadership Jedi mind tricks. So that was a real miss. And rather than expecting them to meet me where I was at, I needed to meet them where they were at. And so that was a huge miss.
Let's talk about a make or two on the other side.
So as a response to that, the big make was to hit the reset button, to unlearn everything I thought I knew and come from a place of humility and curiosity and not make it about me, but make it about my team members. Who are they? What do they care about? What do they know? What do they want? And then meet them there, right? And so asking a lot of questions, getting to know them, getting to know what they cared about, and then wrapping operation around those desires and those needs, showing them that how, working in this business can help them with their long-term goals. And let's continue to talk about their long-term goals and put them on that path to realize that they care about more than what I was offering. I was pushing really hard on the idea of, making good money or, helping people celebrate big occasions. Well, a lot of these people, they wanted personal growth and they wanted a sense of belonging. Once I asked questions and I realized that, then I could change the culture and change the approach. So wrapping the business around them rather than around what I thought about them or what I wanted for them, that was a huge make for me.
Let's talk about a multiplier, way that you maybe were able to multiply your growth, success of staffers, yourself in this vein of thinking with the hourly staff.
I think once I understood what culture actually was, and I helped my employees understand that, no, they're not owners of the business, but they are owners of the culture. So that we defined it together, we created it together, we talked about it a lot. So there was me, there was them, and then there was the culture itself to make this thing tangible and make them love it because it was theirs, because they created it, so they would want to protect it. And what ended up happening is when other employees, newer employees would do things to violate the culture, the employees would call them out or the employees would let me know, which on the outside seems like, wow, they're ratting each other out. That's really not what it's about. They often felt guilty, but they wanted me to know that, hey, this one person, they're calling in when they're running late, asking someone to punch them in. And that's not who we are. That's not what we do. I don't want to be asked to break a rule because they wanted the work environment to be a certain way. And when someone threatened that, they would stand up for what was right. And that really meant a lot to me, that they really cared about the culture. That changed everything. And the culture, then once we defined it, we're able to replicate it, which made opening up our second location much easier.
Well, and Scott, the final question we ask every guest is, what does success mean to you?
It's a big question with a lot of answers, but if I had to quickly come up with two things, and I guess I do, for me, I'm successful if I wake up in the morning and I get to spend my day doing what I want. Mostly. We're always going to have to make sacrifices. I don't want to make the bed or do chores. But overall, I get to control my agenda. That's what I aspire to. The second thing is success is where you live a life that honors your values, where you get to do things that celebrate what you care about most, rather than what other people are telling you should care about or wrapping your life around their values. So for me, being in control of my time, as I said, is big. Family is big. Travel and vacation is big. The more in my life that I'm able to do those things and honor those things, the more of my time I can devote to that, the more successful I feel.
Excellent. Well, Scott, as we bring this to a close, is there anything you were hoping to share or get across that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Yeah, obviously I'm here to promote my book, Stop the Shift Show. And so I hope people will go out and get it wherever books are sold. It's available in print. There's an ebook. There's an audiobook as well. But the big idea that I want to live with people is to understand that hourly workers can do great things. I experienced this firsthand with my own, but more importantly, I've witnessed it in so many other industries and so many other work environments. They're in the minority, but so is everybody who is the best. So if you're someone who leads an hourly team, they can do great things, but it starts with great management.
Scott, thank you so much for a fantastic interview. And let's go ahead and jump into today's 3 key takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is when Scott realized that there's a real fundamental difference between hourly workers and salary workers. And I love how he described in the management books and leadership theory books and so on, that they always seem to be talking about salary workers in so many of these. And he said the way you lead engineers is not the same way that you lead cashiers, even though a lot of these other kinds of leadership practices and management books seem to indicate that you do. And I thought that was a great recognition. So recognizing that often these hourly employees, it is a little more transactional. The work tends to be more repetitive. Maybe they're just, as he said, trying to save money for prom or just to have a part-time job in between their kids being at school or something in that regard. So keeping that perspective is helpful. Takeaway number 2, I think this is something worth noting because if you're over 40, at some point, you know for sure you've had older generation say something about your generation not being whatever expectation they had. And now, being over 40, there's a chance you have probably thought something similar about an upcoming or rising generation. So I thought Scott's advice was excellent to stop judging the generation, start supporting them, because recognize that the world can't function without them. So we need to go to them to help bring them into the marketplace, support them, and be working collaboratively together. Takeaway number 3 is when he talked about the multiplier, where he said once he understood what culture actually is and means, he was able to create it within his company and organization when he was running his small businesses. And what he found is that once he incorporated cultural and behavioral expectations tied to that culture, he found that the employees took ownership of that culture and actually held one another accountable to that culture to keep that culture intact. So I thought that was a great takeaway. And now it's time for today's win-win. So today's win-win is when Scott talked about how hourly workers can do great things, but it starts with great management. So you need to turn and point that finger back at you. And he described an instance in the mist that we talked about when he said he was expecting hourly employees to meet him where he was at, someone who had read leadership books and management books and gone to training and workshops and seminars and such. And instead, he realized that he needs to meet them where they are at and where they are in their lives and career and what they might be doing. And I think that is just a phenomenal win, because recognizing that will help you be a better leader and manager, and it will also help your hourly staff be better staff when they're working and present with you. I thought that was just a great nugget, a great takeaway, and a great summary from his book, which, by the way, is available at Amazon and your favorite places where you like to buy books from. And that's the episode today, folks. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and give us a review. And remember, if you or anyone you know might be ready to franchise their business or take their franchise company to the next level, please connect with us at bigskyfranchiseteam.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you back next week.